I have to monitor the frames, which is true, but it sounds like a cop-out. And that's why I can't take the garbage down. And like, I've been having this like real crisis around it, because it's like, I'm supposed to be working on animation, so like how much time and effort do you put into something that's going to help you that's not actually the work you're supposed to be working on? Especially on a time limit.
Yeah, look, that sounds really difficult. What is your time limit now, by the way?
December, because...
Wait, should we be including this in the podcast?
Well, as long as you don't ask questions like that, I can just pop it in.
Okay. Intro this time?
I kind of like the consistency of you doing it.
You just don't want to do it.
I do not want to do it.
Welcome to the GitGud.CG podcast. My name is Jayden, and this is Kris.
Hi. It's kind of awkward.
Why have we've never struggled like this before? Okay.
I don't know, man. I think it's the time of day. It's gotta be.
Okay. Welcome to the GitGud.CG podcast. This is a podcast where two CG artists talk about getting good at CG. You have so much content right now for throwing me under the bus. My name's Jayden. And this is Kris.
I am also Kris.
Alright, we're not trying that again. That's going to be our horrible ass intro.
I'll put something together, it'll be fine.
No, just leave it raw like that.
Well, we'll see. They won't know.
Yeah. So, Kris, what are today's topics?
So, at the end of the last podcast, we were talking about combining a couple of things that sort of led on from each other, and so we're going to talk about the Dunning-Kruger curve, and around that we were talking about how to go from zero to noob was the tagline, but it's really just how to go from not knowing a lot about something to sort of arming yourself with the information to get better at it.
Yep.
And then from that we sort of wanted to segue a bit into finally rehabilitating a skill set, which is what people are going to be doing more often if they've been working around this sort of media and tech and digital stuff for a while, but they're trying to target a skill set that doesn't really apply.
So,
to
Kris,
something a bit more specific.
Before we get into that, do you want to share your socials?
You can find me at animatorkris anywhere on the internet: Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, other places.
And you can find me at jsto_art. Links are in descriptions.
Great. Well, what have you been working on this week?
Well, I've been doing a couple of things. I've been doing like a little art project with some friends. They're pretty new to 3D, so it's nothing amazing that I'll really share, at least on my ArtStation. It's just a stylized, hand-painted ramen cart scene, which is pretty fun. We did one for Halloween last year. Spooky room. We called it Operation Spooky Pants for some reason. Someone named it off the whim like that. And I've also just been...
I couldn't imagine who that would be.
No, it was not me. Okay. And I've also been working on my CGMA class assignments from when I did that earlier in the year. I've just been doing some remodeling, unwrapping, and we're going to start texturing everything again.
Yeah. Sometimes you open up that project file and it's just not right.
Yeah. So
it's funny. How do you make a differentiation between when to work on one thing and when to work on the other? Because you said that one isn't really like a portfolio piece.
Yeah. Look, I've been struggling.
Work.
We've had like we meet at 7:30, so like just after dinner or whatever, and I'll just go from there in the evening. I previously had a bit of a bigger role. I did in the Halloween one, we did like a room kind of thing. And so
Okay.
I was doing a lot of the lighting, scene composition, a bit of modeling, a bit of texturing. I was doing a bit of everything really.
Yeah.
And the other guys were just doing props. And so they they could kind of go on and off a little bit more. But it was really on me to get the whole thing sorted and done. And so those roles have reversed a bit, where I'm doing props
Right.
and they're doing, one of them's doing the hero prop and the other one's doing the scene building, and I'm just in the back seat doing props.
Yeah, number 3 is always the best place to be. You still get a credit, but you don't have to define anything.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's like giving me a bit of time to work on my CGMA art as well, my hand painted stylized stuff, which has been pretty fun. Although
Cool.
it's just unwrapping, it's never fun.
I don't
Actually,
know. There can be a certain zen to it.
yeah, that is true. You can just throw on a good podcast like the GitGud.CG podcast, or some buttery beats and just chill out, listen to some music and unwrap. Because going back to one of our previous podcasts, I think it was the productivity one, where you talked about the traffic light system of tasks.
Yeah.
I think unwrapping is probably most of the time a green one for me, or at least when I'm marking my seams in
Yeah.
Blender.
Once you know what you're doing, it's green. I think if you're a little bit unpracticed, it can be a bit yellow because there are some like creative decisions that need making based on what you plan to do with it.
Yeah. What podcast was that in? Was that episode 3?
Yeah, I think the productivity one was episode 3. This is 8.
Jeez.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
rolling down on that double digits.
Yeah, man. 32 subscribers. Woo woo.
And we love each and every one of you,
Yeah. All of you.
except that one guy.
Yeah, that one.
You know who you are.
Yeah. Nah, it's alright. No, you don't
Not
actually
you,
exist.
the other guy. We're a little bit scattered this morning, as you may or may not have picked up on.
Yeah, I mean, this morning I was like, yeah, well, last night I was like, yeah, I'm gonna wake up at 6 o'clock and do some art for like an hour or two before our podcast, and then I'm gonna be all ready to go. And then next minute I wake up like 5 minutes after we're meant to meet for our podcast.
Yeah. I was up till about 1 o'clock last night, so I'm not doing amazingly well either.
Oh well. So, Kris, how
Yes.
how do you want to tackle this beast today? This zero to noob and then Dunning-Kruger effect and rehabilitating some skill sets.
Well, we'll hit zero to noob first because this is one of mine. It's a bit tongue in cheek, but the reason I brought it into the podcast was I noticed there were a couple of skills that I needed. It's interesting, maybe as part of rehabilitating a skill set, when you do have a bit more context around the stuff you're doing, the tasks that you need to learn get a bit more micromanagey and smaller, but it's the same as if you're looking at a big topic like how to model in CG, or something small like how to implement something in a game engine. In this case, I was figuring out FPS animations for Unreal Engine and how to implement them in state machines and use blueprints and all that sort of stuff. Which, honestly, I think I understand code better than blueprints, because I think you have to understand code in order to understand what blueprints are even doing. Because it's not like Blender material nodes, but I digress. The the main problem that I was running into was, how do you know where to begin a thing? So if you have the idea of like, I am where I am, I know nothing about this thing, I need to get to a point where I can ask the right questions in order to muddle through. Because there's a point at 0 where it's just this black box of knowledge where you just don't have any understanding of the thing. You just see the output and you see sort of like the starting line. Sometimes you don't even see the starting line.
Yeah.
But you do see the output and you have to be like, how do I go from where I am here to there?
Yeah.
You don't have to be amazing at it. You don't have to retain it. But you do have to get to a point where you, like, I always remember when I was young and stupid and knew nothing about digital music creation, I asked a friend of mine who was into it. It's like, I asked him, how do I get a MIDI? Because
What's
I
a
had no
MIDI?
idea what a MIDI was. I knew the word MIDI.
Okay, what is a MIDI?
Well, MIDI is like a signal framework for inputting music into the computer. And so
Right.
you can get a MIDI keyboard, which is like a keyboard that puts out a MIDI signal. But I didn't realize that. I just thought MIDI was the whole thing.
Right,
And so
mate.
he couldn't help me understand that because I didn't have enough context to ask a question that he could answer. Because all he could
Ah.
say is, I don't know what that is. Like,
Ah, right, yeah.
that's just a word. It sounds like you're saying, like, bumble, jumble, rumble.
I think what's really important for going zero to noob is to first get to zero. Is that you've
As
got
in,
to
find the starting line.
find the starting line, and I think what you've got to do first is figure out what you want to do and where you want to go, and figure out some terminologies. So, if you want to be a digital music creator or whatever,
And
learn
that,
what that thing is and what that role involves. If you want to be
yeah,
a 3D artist, um, don't just say 3D artist generally, unless you really, really want to be a generalist. But figure out what sort of niches that you want to um, go into.
the
Have a
terminology
goal
thing,
before you start.
yeah, the terminology thing's one that I want to pull out because that's kind of my answer to the question of how to go from zero to noob. It's find out how the people who do it talk about it
Yeah.
and then find out what those words mean. So that's generally how I do it. But what I sort of wanted to talk about was processes around that. I wanted to go over like how you and I approach a problem like that to sort of put it into context.
Yeah.
So how if I said, it is really important that you learn how to play trombone, like let's use a CG example. If I came to you and I said, color grading is an important part of the pipeline, you need to do that on your next piece. How would you approach that?
I would probably I'd probably first look up what color grading means because I have an understanding of it, but I don't have a deep enough understanding to know why and exactly how. I have a general sort of understanding of it, but
Yeah.
I would need to first go and define that much more thoroughly.
So step one is like color grading.
Yeah.
The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines it.
And then you refine from there because dictionary definitions can be super broad. But
And sometimes unhelpful if they're out of context.
yeah.
Like, if you get a definition for something, like, it's also, I think a great example of this is job titles.
Mm.
I've had jobs where I've applied for the job and gotten the job, and then I had to look up what the job is because it's like, administrative such and such in charge of Rumblecast 11, like it's just a bunch of words put together. And normally what they're doing is that they have a position that needs filling, which is quite broad, and they're trying to put a title on it. But that same title
Is
could be
not what they thought
applied.
it was.
Yeah, it's not what they thought it was, and other companies apply it differently.
Mm.
And so, out of the context of it, the dictionary definition of what that title is might not actually be very helpful.
Yeah. And when you and I were studying together at this CG school, when people would ask me what I'd studied, I'd just be like, 3D animation. Even though I have never had any interest in being an animator, that's just what people understand. And I think in workplaces where it might not necessarily be a game studio or something that's a little bit broader than that, they might the person writing the job posting might just be like, oh yes, they have to create these 3D models and texture stuff. Okay, animator job
Yeah.
position available.
I need animations, so I'm going to hire an animator. And that's
Yes.
actually on the opposite side of that. That happens as an animator. You're like, is this actually an animator job? Or is this I want you to make that, the compare the market's meerkat for me. Make it move and stuff.
Make it do the things. Make it dance.
For money.
Yeah. But I think just going back for a second, one point I wanted to make with going from zero to noob is that I think that it's really important to define where you want to go concisely early on. Because
So
I've had this
refine the goal.
refine the goal before you really get going. You can't completely refine what you don't know, but it's at least good to have the best
Yeah.
understanding that you can. You don't have to have it obviously perfect, but it's good to sort of know
Well,
a bit
I'd almost
more
say
because when
it's sort of like a middle ground because it would almost be unhelpful to refine it too perfectly. You need to refine it to a point where you can see the direction you're moving in. But if you refine that too particularly, that might be unhelpful because you might not know enough to know where you're supposed to be going. So you might be headed in the wrong direction to where you actually want to be going.
Yeah, and there's a point where as we spoke about in our last podcast, where you just kind of want to download Blender and play with things until something piques your interest. And then once that thing piques your interest, that's when you start to explore that a little bit more. And once you do that exploration, that's when you decide I want to get good at this. That's when you first of all subscribe to our channel. Second of all, you define what it is that you want to do.
Okay, so here's my question to you is
Partially define. Yeah.
What do you think is more likely? That they're going to be going in and they're going to be exploring to find the thing from zero that they want to then pursue? Or do you think it's more likely that they find a requirement to need to do the thing? Because one's very much larger than the other. In one case, zero to noob is how to go from not a CG artist to a CG artist. Or like a beginner novice CG artist. The other side of that is how to go from somebody who doesn't know how to color grade to somebody who does know how to color grade.
Okay.
So it's like, where's the bar there? Is it the title? Because I could take two titles right now. I could say I am lead animator at my freelance studio.
Yeah.
I could also say I am a student. Both of those titles I can apply to myself. But I think it's less about, in this case, I think it's less about the actual job progression and more about the skill, the skill application, which I suppose it's a matter of like terminology, but that's sort of where I was coming from. So could you talk a bit around that?
I think that it's difficult to. I think it's difficult to really go from, say, you've got to go from zero to noob if you're experienced artists and if you are a complete novice, because if you're a complete novice, then there is so many things you don't understand compared to a experienced professional 3D artist that just has worked for years and suddenly, oh, I need to learn color grading or whatever. That the color grading I feel like is a bit more of a niche thing. I know it's just an example, but I think that going from complete zero, like absolute noob, is that there is so much exploring that you need to do. There are so many goals that you need to define.
But it's about the context, right?
Yeah, it's about the context.
So what I'm sort of seeing as the through line is that if you are a more advanced artist, you may have actually encountered some of those terminologies. You may have actually encountered some of that periphery of the thing you want to do. And I think that's finding zero, because you're surrounded by this cloud of vague and disconnected concepts that you have to reach out and assemble. Whereas if you're a noob, if you're at zero, your job is to surround yourself with those vague, disconnected concepts so that you can get to the point where you can assemble them. And I think noob is being surrounded by those, and I think zero is finding a place where you're throwing that at the wall. And so the process that I tend to do, and this is very specific to gaining a new skill in CG. I think the only other thing that I could really bring to mind that I've used this on elsewise is learning a new song on guitar or something like that. You find as much tertiary information as you can. You search keywords, you read articles, you watch videos, you surround yourself. Because one thing I do want to point out is that I don't listen to a lot of like, how to do this thing for a beginner, walkthrough tutorials, because I don't actually find those tremendously helpful.
Right.
Because they're not teaching you how people actually talk about the thing. Because there's a difference to the way people talk about a thing inside of the context of understanding that the person that they're talking to understands what they're talking about, and the context of somebody teaching and sort of walking somebody to a point. There's stuff that they're leaving out, and that's actually really unhelpful from a tutoring perspective, because you want to hear it in the context. You want them to talk about it as if you understand, so you know what's important. Because valuing what's important is, in my opinion, the best way to get from a position where you don't know what you're talking about to a position where you do.
Yeah, and that's what I found with a lot of tutorials, is that that all they will be doing is just telling you to press this button, now that button. Okay, now press the rotate button. Voila, you've got that, and you don't really understand why or how you've done what you've done, but you've just gone with the knowledge of that other person.
And the why is important, and that's
I
don't know if everybody learns that way, but that's definitely how I learn.
And that's what you're actually doing at the moment. You're creating, what is it, a newsletter for...
Yes. So if we're going to go into the plug zone right now, I'm gauging interest in it at the moment. I'm doing PDF tutorials for the ADHD brain who need a walkthrough rather than a video, sort of justifying the why behind particular concepts. I'm looking for topic suggestions as well, so if anybody wants to comment below the video or email krisandjayden@gmail.com, that's A&D, and I am soliciting both people for that mailing list. We'll have a link in the description, and anyone who wants to sort of suggest a topic for that. But the main issue at hand is the context, and it's not helpful. It's like the whole 1-2 dragon thing, like you draw 2 circles, you put some spines on it, and then you draw the rest of the dragon.
I haven't heard that analogy before, but go on.
Well, it's a pretty common meme that goes around art Twitter. Sometimes it's an owl, sometimes it's a rabbit, but like...
yeah, okay.
It's like those books where they're like, okay, well, so to draw a warrior fighting a, dragon, all you have to do is you put a circle here and then a circle here,
I've seen this.
making sure that they're, evenly spaced, and then you draw the rest of the drawing. And that's like...
Yep, okay, thank
you. Not helpful.
Yeah.
It's really not helpful. Yeah. And it's not helpful, and you don't actually learn anything. You just learn to parrot. And that's why I really think this zero to noob thing is the way you should think about it. Because if you don't know anything about it and you just follow steps, you have only learned how to do that one thing within the context of that one thing. You haven't learned a skill that you can redirect to something else to apply to a different use case.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even know why or when to do that.
Because what happens, and this is somewhat inevitable, but if you just parrot, Blender Guru or whoever, you go up Mount Stupid on the Dunning-Kruger effect, and you get to the top where you're like, yeah, cool, I've made a chair and a donut. And I by the way, saying Mount Stupid, I don't mean to offend anyone that follows tutorials, because I also follow tutorials, but
that's just what it's called a lot of the time in the actual charts that they put out.
Yeah, you go up Mount Stupid, and you've made your chair, you've made your donut, your anvil, and you go out to go do your own thing. And I've seen a few people post about this on Twitter and on Reddit, where they just don't know what they're doing because they're so used to just pressing the buttons that the tutor is pressing, and then they just crash hard into the valley of despair. And that's
coming from me, that's a failure of education. Like, I'm a pretty passionate education advocate, and that's not education. That's teaching somebody to, that's teaching what's the phrase? You give somebody a fish and they'll eat for a day. Teach them how to fish and they'll eat the rest of their life. That's
Yeah.
giving them a fish.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you need to teach them how to fish.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if you teach them, the hows and the whys, or if you learn the hows and the whys, you're still probably going to fall into the valley of despair, but you're going to be more equipped to push through, because at first you're going to learn a bunch of things. You're going to go, yeah, I've learned all this, I've learned all these hows and whys, and this up is going to keep going, but don't be fooled. You're still on Mount Stupid,
Yeah.
and you're
And I'd advise anybody who hasn't seen it to sort of Google a picture of this Dunning-Kruger curve, because it's important to understand the context. The meta context of the curve itself is that when you're learning something, you start from zero, but then when you start to see success, you think you're a lot better than you are. You actually get to a point where you think, yeah, I could take on the world, but you haven't even started to learn yet. And as soon as you run into something that you can't do or something that you don't understand, that's when you fall off the peak of Mount Stupid into the valley of despair, where you realize how
you realize
long
you are
you
Jon
have
Snow
left to
and you know
go.
nothing.
Yeah.
And
You,
and that's where a lot of people just fall off. As soon as they plunge into Valley of Despair, they just fall off and just
stay there
they
because
stay there, and they don't go back to CG, or whatever the thing is that they're doing.
a lot of people don't like when people talk about the Dunning-Kruger curve, they tend to see it as like an inevitability that you go into the valley of despair, then you climb up the hard work hill, and then you get back to expert eventually, but you'll never actually get as high as you were on Mount Stupid, where you thought that you were king of everything, because the expert comes with an understanding that you might not actually know everything and a bit more of a humble attitude. But my point is that people tend to present it as if that's a natural progression. But I like to say that on the Dunning-Kruger curve, there's gravity.
Yeah.
And if you don't put the work in to climb up Hard Work Hill, you're not going to get out of it. I tend to think of that area as the muddy middle. Someone used that term for me one time, and it made a lot of sense, because what they were saying is it's really easy to get somebody from... it's really easy if you're a good tutor to get somebody from zero to noob. But then beyond that point, it's the muddy middle where stuff is just wrong, and nobody can really tell you exactly why or help. It's just up to you to figure it out for yourself. And that's why getting to that noob state as quickly as possible is very important.
Yeah, and once you are into that muddy middle, like you said, it's really just your own responsibility of pushing through and learning the things you need to learn and being persistent in it, because someone can help you get up and over Mount Stupid, but they're not going to hold your hand forever, because if you keep,
They can
following
definitely
the
they can
breadcrumbs,
definitely push you off. They can definitely push you off the peak of Mount Stupid.
and they can definitely
Like,
get you to the top as well.
yeah.
But
But
if they keep holding your hand through it, then you're never going to get to the, what did you call it? The hard work mountain.
Hard Work Hill,
Hard
yeah,
work hill.
that's a Kris special.
Yeah. Okay.
If you the thing is that if somebody's guiding you up a hill to begin with, it's Mount Stupid. If you're
Yeah.
holding onto somebody's hand, you are not climbing Hard Work Hill, no matter how much you think you might be, and you can climb multiple Mount Stupids in succession. That's actually the process, I think. Once you're into the muddy middle, it's not actually a flat gradient. I think you just keep climbing Mount Stupid until you figure something out.
Yeah, I mean, I've had multiple Mount Stupids myself. I remember the
And
first,
it happens with every skill.
yeah, for CG in particular with me, I remember uh, far too many years ago when I first started learning CG. Uh, I remember talking to my friend saying, "Oh yeah, man, I feel like now that I've learned a bunch of things, I could easily just make a WoW character. I feel like I could just go and take a screenshot of my character in WoW and model it. I could model a Tauren or a human or a night elf or whatever." Little did I know, I was on top of Mount Stupid.
Yeah.
And I crashed hard for a long time, and then a couple of years later, I came back to it, and I started to climb up Mount Stupid again, being like, yeah, this is great. And I think that's when I met you, and I was like thinking, oh yeah, I can model and texture the world. Yeah, this is great. Neck minute on top of Mount Stupid yet again, and then I go and think, oh, maybe I'll learn a bit of ArcViz, and plot twist again, I'm back into the Valley of Despair, 'cause realizing I know nothing about CG, and
Yeah.
a couple
That's
of
where
years,
context comes in
yeah,
because I think a lot of your growth over the last few years in CG has been in that ArcViz space,
mm,
which has a different context.
mm,
So even some of the skills that are applicable, and we'll probably get into this a bit later with rehabilitating a skill set,
yeah,
but even if the skills themselves are technically the same thing, because they're for a different result,
mm,
you're having to reconfigure that. Like you have to unlearn something to relearn it, because what's important for, real-time hand-painted game engine stuff isn't necessarily important for architecture. And in architecture, the specificity probably isn't as required in CG.
yeah. I remember when I was in first year at uni, at my particular uni, it was 2 semesters, and so the first semester it was all of the design students. It was architecture, landscape architecture, interior architecture, um, and industrial design. That first semester was really geared towards industrial design, and then in second semester we specialized a bit more, and we had our lecturer say, okay, cool, so you've learned a few things last semester. It's a little bit too related to industrial design, so you're gonna have to just unlearn a bit of that and relearn this stuff.
And
And
unlearning,
the class just collectively face palms.
yeah, because unlearning is hard.
Mm,
That's why I think it's really important, this zero to noob thing, because if you zero to noob the wrong thing, you're going to have to noob to zero, then zero to noob again.
yeah, yeah,
Because,
and that's what it was like back in
and
first year.
I guess that kind of comes back into rehabilitating a skill set as well, but I'm not really ready to move on to that yet.
Yeah,
I think there's more meat on this bone.
more meat on this rib that you're gonna rip off.
I, like one of those cartoon guys, where it's just the bone with like this glob of meat on the end. Always look delicious.
Oh yeah, one of my old housemates got one of those. It was like a tomahawk steak.
Yeah.
Except before he bought it, he didn't check to see if we had a pan big enough for it. Plot twist: no, we did not have a pan big enough for it because it was about twice the size of our largest pan.
See, there you go. That's zero to noob in cooking.
I mean,
But
he managed to cook it in the oven and it tasted pretty good. But anyway,
yeah,
I digress.
yeah. The bit that I just wanted to sort of circle back around to and dig our teeth into a bit was the processes, because I sort of got tangented on this, but my process tends to be just immerse myself in information about the thing. I find it really hard to learn anything unless I can really immerse myself in it.
Yeah,
Like have, podcasts, videos, tutorials, just places to go and places to look to gain information if I have a question. Like that's where Google and YouTube really come in handy, because it's like you hear somebody say, oh, and then you have to, widgel the wodule over here. What's a wodule? Like everybody in the industry is just like, oh yeah, like a wodule, but you need to go learn what a wodule is.
yeah,
And then you need to learn why a wodule is important. And crucially, you have to learn how important. Because I remember distinctly when I was learning animation to begin with, not just even character animation, just sort of like computer-based splined animation.
Mm.
The concept of the graph editor was very important. And so the people teaching me wanted to impress upon me the importance of the graph editor and how you had to get all up in the graph editor and you had to make it look pretty, because that's how you get smooth motion.
right.
It's not actually true. The problem was that because it is important and you need to know how to use it, they were giving broad generalizations about what was important, what you needed to do. And
Right.
that can really sit with somebody for a while until somebody else who you trust to help you unlearn that gives you that information. Because a lot of the time my animations were coming out very floaty and they lacked sort of like impact. And that was really frustrating to me because I've done 2D hand drawn animation where you just draw it the way you want it and you get that impact. But struggling with the computer, this like perfectly splined thing that you have to sort of rough up a little bit, but in the right way so it doesn't just look jaggy, that was a problem because it was difficult to get my head out of the space of I need to open up the graph editor, I need it to cover the whole screen, I need to pick out a curve, and then I need to do stuff to these handles.
And
That's
you've
how
got to make
people
it look good.
Yeah, and somehow that's going to lead to a good outcome. The truth is that a lot of the time, the professional animators that I've gotten advice from, they're like, oh yeah, pop it up when you need it, but the rest of the time it's like the movement in space that you're looking at. Look for flow, look for your timing and your spacing. I only really open the graph editor up when I need to do something stupid. And nobody's like checking your work, you know. You don't have to like hand in your graph editor at the end of the production. And someone's like, oh, you have a weird tangent here. If it's between a frame, who gives a crap?
Yeah, it's like, does the animation look good? Yes.
Yeah.
Then job done.
And it took me forever to get to that point.
Yeah.
But then there's also the meta context, which is it does actually matter in certain cases. So like if that geometry is going into an active rendering situation where there's going to be like say motion blur calculated in 3D space, if the thing between those two frames gets resampled between those two frames, if it's off in, you know, nonsense land 3,000 points up on the y-axis, and then it comes back for that frame, the motion blur will be coming from that direction. So in that case, it does matter, and you need to know if there's going to be motion blur, because then you do need to put the work in to make it look nice. But that's a context thing that you need to know, and you need to know why.
Yeah, I do want to challenge you on this slightly,
Okay.
in that, you know, you and I have known each other for a while, and we've seen each other run around chasing our own tails, being like, "What are we doing?" So how has that going really deep, really hard into the information and the hows and whys hindered you? Has that contributed to that, where you have done all this deep research up front, and then by the time you get to the actual doing, you kind of go, moving on to the next thing now?
That's where I think you need to know where noob is. You need to know when to execute. Like another topic I wanted to hit in the pod was when to be loud about stuff, when to go out into the world and sort of like be present, be the idiot in the room and learn stuff, and when to just get quiet and execute. And to answer your question, there is a point of diminishing returns, but I think it's past the 0 to noob point. I think it's into you're starting to gain the knowledge of an expert without the talent of an expert. Does that make sense? So
Yeah,
it's
that
like
does.
you get to a point where you should just be practicing and you should be implementing, but then you get to a point where you're still information gathering, so your taste outweighs your skill, and that can become a barrier because all of a sudden you know what is good, you know how it should be and how you should do it, but you haven't the foggiest way of getting it there. You don't know, and the frustration will be real, and you will know how bad it is, which is actually why sometimes Mount Stupid is important. And you need to sort of have your skill keep up with you in that regard. Because if you're still on Mount Stupid doing stuff, you don't think that you're behind. You don't think that what you're doing is pointless. You can't see the forest for the trees. And that's sometimes important to have the blinders on. Because if you know what you're doing is amateuristic, you have that taste to know that, but you don't have that talent to back it up. What you are is a critic of the thing that you're doing. You're not a practitioner.
Would you say that that is somewhat applicable to you at the moment with your previous animation, where you had all the technical skill, you had all the artistic skill, but you didn't have that professional workflow skill to get that particular type of animation or those particular type of game animations done?
I suppose The information does help, especially when it's knowledge work like
Definitely.
this. I'm at a point now where, because we're doing this whole, like, because I'm definitely climbing up a hill. At any one day, it feels like one or the other. I'm not going to say whether it's
Hill to be determined.
hill to be determined at the top,
Yep.
but I feel as though the act of sitting down and actually implementing and making projects and putting stuff out, it's something I haven't really done before. So I feel like what I'm doing at the moment is catching up, like letting my talent catch up with my taste, if that makes sense. And it's not like riding a bike. Like, if you let these skills sit, you do lose them.
Yeah.
And your taste does not diminish. So to say that there was no way to catch up your talent to your taste would be to say you're screwed, you know? Like,
Yeah, and you do need to keep multiple sort of types of skills all sort of bubbling up at a relatively consistent rate, because if one falls, then it's going to really be difficult to pull those back up.
and the hard bit is knowing when. Like, it's a really good example that a guy called Sean West uses is the different burners on a gas stove, because you're using the same gas supply, you're just turning up different burners to be hotter.
Yeah.
And so knowing which burner to run hot, knowing which burners to run on a simmer is really complicated. And that's like really up to you and your circumstances.
Yeah, that's a pretty good analogy. Did we want to
Well, I think there is a natural segue there, but it's to a tangent that I sort of wanted to address, so I'm going to leave that one up to you.
All right.
Because I was talking a bit when we first got on the call about what I've been doing this week, and there's a sort of natural segue into there for the multiple talents thing. This is something that I don't know, and it sounds like, though you've got some opinions on it, you might not have like a specific answer to it either. So I kind of wanted to bring it to the listeners a bit and just directly ask the question what they think about it. See if they want to leave a comment or email us at krisandjayden@gmail.com.
Yeah, and if you leave us a message, we'll likely discuss it in a future podcast.
And the question is, what counts as the work? So for the context of the question, I am trying to get an animation show reel together so that I can either get my freelance business going or apply to other work. That's something I've not made a secret of. The issue I'm having is how much of that work is the animating. Because when I finish a shot, I know that I'm in for at least another week and a half of, setting up the scene and rendering and figuring out the everything that is not the animated shot itself. And I find that very frustrating. Because, like, for instance, when I'm running a render that's going to take a week on my Windows box, I can't then keep using Maya because it lags to goodness. And so what I've spent the last week doing is setting up my own render farm. Like, I think I threw it out very flippantly in the last podcast that, I could whack Proxmox on this server I've got sitting here and run a render farm, and that just started boiling. And so I've spent the last week using something like, I haven't got cards on the table. I haven't got it running yet because it's a lot of work to get OpenQ working on a Proxmox deployment with different virtualizations and containers and all that sort of stuff. The point is, that's stuff that I can do. I can make the calculation that once it's running, if I get it working, it's going to save me 8 times as much time on rendering, and it's going to take it off my Windows machine.
Which allows you to animate while you render, which you can't currently do.
So it sort of makes it synchronous.
Yeah.
And I see the value in that. But if it takes longer than that original render would have actually taken to set up, and though it has like future value, what is the work? Am I avoiding the work, or am I preparing, responsibly? Where's that line? Do you have any opinions on that?
I think that it is somewhat work. It's preparing, and like you say, time spent preparing isn't time wasted. But
But
you
in the
do have
context
the
of your
content.
previous question, you were saying like, when are you putting too much into something before actually doing the thing you're supposed to be doing, right?
Yeah, and I struggle with that so often where I never really have a clear understanding or answer. But
That's
I
why I'm bringing it
yeah
to the listeners as well, because this is somewhere that this is the getting good part. I don't know.
yeah
Honestly, I don't know. I feel like it's vaguely beneficial. I don't know.
yeah. I mean, in your particular instance, I don't know. Maybe it's just worth you going out and buying a second computer or laptop where you can just render on your main computer and keep animating on your other computer, just so is going to cost you a bit of money, but well,
Well, if that was the case, I could set it up on Amazon Web Servers and have like 50 cents a frame, like the other thing is that like I do have another Windows computer that I could render it on. It's just currently not where I live, and it's in a COVID red zone. So like, do I buy another computer, or do I wait until that one's available, or do I put the time in to set this
yeah.
up? Like, this is the position where I don't want to
I
make it
think
too personal, but like the question is, what is the work? Am I animating by making my future animation easier and quicker?
I think it is work, but you've got to consider what is counterproductive work. So, and what ways you can do that more efficiently and quickly is you is using a render farm better, because there are render farms where you can. It's like, I think it's called Sheepit, where you uh, can get renders done for
Crowd
free.
rendering.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crowd rendering, or you could pay for rendering, or you could buy a second computer, or you could have that computer sent to where you are, or you can
I
spend the
could do a
time.
lot of things,
Yeah,
yeah.
so it's I think when you're in one of these situations, you've got to consider
But
it.
where's that value line? Like the reason I started doing this was the Arnold watermark problem. I came in with a bit of beef uh, last time. I didn't want to pay Autodesk another red razoo for an Arnold license,
Yeah,
and so this is where this whole solution came from. But at the moment, what I'm trying to do is get a particular render out. It is set up in RenderMan, so I'm setting up the solution to run RenderMan nodes, and I don't want to have to, like, it's non-commercial, so I don't have to worry about buying RenderMan licenses and Tractor and all that sort of stuff. Because RenderMan's in a unique position where it runs on Maya and Blender synchronously, I can actually set up the project file in Maya with RenderMan there, output a RenderMan render project, and then deploy that to a Blender instance as a GPU or an Alembic cache, and actually deploy the render from Maya, have it render on RenderMan through Blender, and then have it deployed back,
this
which to
is
me is a very interesting problem.
this is a very convoluting sounding thing coming from someone who just doesn't really do much animation, and if I do renders, it's just a single still frame of a building, and that's it.
I get it,
Yeah, but
but
yeah, what
I've done the math. There is a definite speed increase to this if it doesn't take me too long to set up and it keeps working. And I've also got to take into account the fact that I am moving at the end of the year, so I need to keep it small and easily, reset upable. Um, there's a lot of factors going into it, and I'm even documenting it because I want to put up well, A, for my own reference, but B, I'd like to post it on Medium or something because it's a pretty involved process,
I,
and I want to get something out of that.
I think
But
I think what you need to do is, and I think this is general advice to everybody, is figure out alternative ways and look at the pros and cons of each one and go with what you are most comfortable with, that will save you the most time and get you the best result relatively. Maybe it's continuing to do what you do. You are in a bit of a
to simplify,
time sensitive situation.
yeah, I guess to simplify the problem, the main issue is that long term, this is the best solution for me, regardless of what direction I go in. Short term, it definitely is not.
And the issue is that you have a time sensitive situation where maybe the better solution is to take something where it's not the best um, long-term solution, but it will get you that short-term solution. And it's one of those things where in life it's generally harder decision is usually the best long-term decision. A hard decision makes an easy life, and an easy decisions make a hard life. So it's just, I think, balancing knowing when to make the hard and when to make the easy decisions. I think when you're in a time-sensitive situation like you are, maybe those easy decisions, like having your computer sent down or buying another computer that might not be as fast but it's already good to go, maybe that's the way to go for you to get to where you want to be. Because there's the issue for you where, say you get this set up and then you get to where you want to go, right? And
Yeah.
then at the end of the year, bang, you get a job in an animation studio. Are you really going to be using that render farm, or is it just all this time
I'll be
set up?
using a render farm very similar at the studio.
But that's wouldn't surely that would be mostly IT's responsibility. You as animator Kris animating characters, you know, that's not.
There exists the possibility that the job would include a technical animator role. I don't see them as necessarily disparate depending on the size of the company.
Yeah, and I think that's something it's just for you to decide if that's something you value. Is it worth putting all this time in now to potentially get a job where you don't really need um, that render farm and might not even use the skills so much, although you may actually indeed need to use those skills? Or do you want to just do the quick thing now to get you a good result, but not the best long-term one, but will help you? Because here's the thing, if you do the quick thing now, then it can get you to pumping out animations faster, which could get you to the goal quicker. But who knows? Maybe you want to go do freelancing, and in that case, the render farm is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, so just in the context of what we were talking about before, it does become context, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's all of these. When you get down to it, they're all good choices. It's just trying to decide which one's the good choice for now.
Yeah, now and also for future you.
Yeah, and like rationalizing that against each other, because a lot of your recommendations there were financial, and honestly, that's not really a consideration for me at the moment. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
So my natural inclination is to put the hard work in to utilize most effectively something I already have. But I see your point. And obviously for the listeners, it might be becoming obvious to you that I ask these questions because I want to say it out loud, but I'm very bad at taking advice. But feel free to send it through anyway. The asynchronous nature of messages means that I won't have a toxic response.
Continue.
The other thing about it is that, I got kind of excited about it because it was working. So I kind of want to be talked into it, but it's really funny when you know yourself. You stand behind yourself and watch how you act and what you're doing, and even if you know it's not the right thing, you know exactly why you're doing it.
You can be a very disagreeable person, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but you want...
Depends how much you believe in what you're being disagreeable about.
Yeah. Or are you just being disagreeable?
You're just being curmudgeonly for no reason. Yeah. Well, look, at the end of the day, I think I'm suffering from a little bit of sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah.
Not of money, but of time, because I have put a lot of energy and thought into the problem, and it's within biting distance. It may be worth considering it through that lens. But
how long do you reckon until this render farm is going to be set up?
Well, the farm itself, the networking and server infrastructure is G2G, good to go. I even got I had such a dumb moment the other day where I couldn't get it to ping off the router, and I've got this black box of a Telstra ISP router, so I thought it was happening in there, and I was about to ring up and go completely Karen on them. But then I had a look at the back of the server and I'd misconfigured the networking cable, and so I had like
God,
one of
that
those
would be
really red
embarrassing.
face moments. Glad I didn't make that call.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a tangent for another time.
So to answer the question, how long do you reckon until she's good to go?
That depends if I run into any more problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if it all goes swimmingly, I could probably have it spun up in maybe like a day and a half of effort.
A full day and a half effort?
Yeah, that would be like a full work day, possibly with some evenings thrown in. The issue is that if I run into like a configuration issue, I'm going to be up to my elbows in Linux bash code, and that could be anywhere up to another week trying to work it out, because like honestly, I'm not a programmer.
Well, look, I'm not saying stop doing it, but and this is something I've talked about in previous podcasts, is set your conditions for failure. Even in this sort of situation, I think it's important to do because you are on a bit of a time schedule.
That's the thing.
Figure out when you say enough is enough, because if you fail and you're going to hit that point anyway, but you're not going to realize when you get to that point. So define that as your stopping point.
But just to finish that whole thing off, the main question is, how do you know when you're doing the work you're supposed to be doing? Because we have one on our list of podcast topics to hit, which is productive procrastination, which I think might apply in this case. That the idea is that I'm being productive, which was the meta goal.
Yeah.
But are you working on the highest leverage work that you should be working on? And how do you know when to work on that and when to move on to something else? I'm really interested to hear other people's responses to that.
Yeah, I think it'd be pretty good to get a bit of interaction from some of the viewers on how are you more productive, and when do you know what to do when, and when to stop doing what. That's the biggest thing, is when to know when to
stop doing what. Yeah, I do like that.
Yeah. And so is that a good point to sort of segue into rehabilitating a skill set?
Yeah, because honestly, I feel like I do it every 6 months or so, so I think I'm a bit of an old hand at it. Whether or not that's a good thing is not established, but what are your thoughts on that phrase, let alone the actual...
Well, when you first said it, I kind of thought it was pretty applicable in terms of, oh, cool, this thing that makes me think about all those times where I think about doing all those things that I've previously done and can't do anymore because it's just been so long since I've done that. I've got to sort of sit down and be like,
It's like restatting in an RPG, right? You were going down the warrior track, and then you decided you liked the magic system, so now you're a mage, but now you've got like 6 experience points sitting in warrior that you can't do anything with.
Yeah, well, for me, it's more like I started to learn hand-painted CG art years ago, and then I started to climb Mount Stupid fairly high, and I came down a little bit, but I still felt like I'd learnt quite a good amount of it. And then a couple of years later, I wanted to really get back into that, and I just couldn't. It was just like trying to remember what the hell I'm meant to do. I was so confident in it before. I was like, yeah, I've got to do this, and then I do that, and I've got to do this because I've got to do that. And I could remember only just scattered things of it where I'm just kind of guessing and hoping to, be able to revive those skills. And that has taken me a little while.
And on that rehabilitation of those skills, do you feel like it's the process of sort of remembering muscle memory, or do you have to actually relearn stuff? Are you taking things that you know and having to reapply? Because the way I sort of originally thought about the question was more about like your ArcViz, right? You do a lot of ArcViz, you got a master's degree in architecture, and you're moving in a different direction. How much of that can you move across and sort of jerry-rig into a useful skill.
Right, yeah, okay. So you're talking in a
That
way that I'd
that's
sort of
how
say recalibrating a skill set, or
that's actually good terminology. I like that. Let's hit rehabilitating in the way you were talking about first, and then we'll go into recalibrating.
okay. So for rehabilitating a skill set, for me, I was just hoping and praying that it was going to be remembering muscle memory, but keep in mind that when I had stopped previously, I was peak Mount Stupid. I hadn't even really
Yeah.
fallen into the valley of despair. I was peak Mount Stupid,
Right, and that's where you left it. So every
and
time you
that's where I
looked
left
back, you
it.
were still standing up on the peak.
Yeah, I just look back, I'm like, oh, there I am all the way up there, and then I see this little label at my feet. It's like Mount Stupid, Captain of Mount Stupid.
Da, da, da.
Just like sitting up there with my underpants on my head, with a bath towel as a cape.
Oh, was that Monty Python thing with the Gumbies? My head hurts. I don't know if that was Monty Python.
I
Anyway,
don't remember what
continue.
that is, but anyway, I I was hoping that it was just remembering all of those skills that I had, but and it was to an extent remembering sort of muscle memory, but as I've gotten more practice at it, I've come to realize that no, there's still a lot of things that I've had to learn. So
And is that practical skills, or is that software knowledge, or is that
it's both, and
context?
it's also trying to figure out where to aim the gun, because I last year is when I thought, yeah, I'm going to go and try to do some stylized art, and this
Mm.
was during the first sort of lockdown
Mm-hmm.
for a while, and I thought, okay, cool, I'm going to do some stylized art, but hand painted, it's all gone to PBR now, it's all procedural. Maybe I'll try to learn some of that. So I I didn't really have a clear goal of what I wanted to do, and so
Mm.
I started to learn a bit of uh, procedural stuff, where I did a CG cookie course in making a treasure chest, and it was
Mm.
this strange workflow where I don't think it would really be used all that often in a AAA studio, maybe in indie, who
Yeah.
knows? And then
Well, that's another context thing, because
yeah,
like something that I've been focusing on when I am animating is that I'm trying to apply workflows that I think fit in nicely with production. Because when you're just doing CG on your own, it's very easy to
go
find a
down
workflow
somewhere
that
that you
works for you.
yeah
Yeah.
yeah, and so I was doing all this stuff, trying to get good. I was some things I would finish and some things I wouldn't finish. And I was just playing around with workflows. Some of them I was, doing high poly model, then bake out, and then other ones I was doing a sculpt, then bake out. Um, and then others I was just doing low poly and then PBR texture in Mixer, Quixel Mixer.
Yep.
Not Adobe Mixer, but Quixel Mixer. Um, Adobe, they're coming for you. Uh, and it was just this for pretty much most of 2020. It was trying to figure out the workflow that I meant to be doing, trying to reclimb back up Mount Stupid, because I convinced myself that hand painted was dead. I also had this like confusion or sort of impatience of, do I want to do ArcViz? And so I'd do a
Mm.
bit of stylized art, then I'd do a bit of ArcViz, then I'd do a bit of stylized art, and then I'd get halfway through an ArcViz thing, and then halfway through an art thing, and then plot twist, that ArcViz thing took 3 months, and then I've forgotten all these things that I've done with stylized art.
So, are you saying that when you tried rehabilitating the skill set, you ended up sort of stretching it in too many directions, and it diluted the
It,
process?
think of when think of when you're in a video game and you get, say you're in GTA and you get hit by a car and your body just ragdolls into the air. That was basically me.
Right.
So I just, first of all, I had no idea which direction I wanted to go in. Do I want to be a freelance ArcViz artist? Do I want to go back and work in architecture? Do I want to go do stylized art? Did that have to be hand painted? No, that's illegal now. Do I want to do? Does that mean I have to do PBR
Yeah.
things? I'm like, oh well, what do I use? And I wasn't settling on a defined goal, and I think that was something that was really important. So looping back around to make this all relevant again is that after a while, I eventually started working back in architecture again, and I saw this CGMA class, and I will always talk very highly of this class because it was great, and it was hand painted, and I thought, whoa, like there's a hand painted class. Is there still a demand for this? Does this still exist? What's going on? And so I went and did the class, and as I was doing it, I found out, oh no, there is still definitely a market for hand painted stuff, probably not as much as it previously was, and
Mm.
that had made me realize, oh yes, I definitely do want to do this still, and I can do this, so I'm going to do it. And the process of doing that, I I was trying to rehabilitate skill sets through attempting to rely on muscle memory, but there was also a big learning curve, and just I was peak amount stupid and didn't really know a workflows correctly, and I still had a long way to go in terms of painting textures.
So what I'm pulling out of that is when it came to making a decision between it, you'd convinced yourself that the thing you wanted to do wasn't actually something worth working on, which made rehabilitating the skill set difficult. It was only once you actually allowed yourself to do the thing you wanted to do that you found the energy to actually put the time in to sort of turn the barge, as it were,
Yeah.
and start down that path. So, what you're saying is that finding your bliss is more important than the employability of the skill set you're pursuing?
Um, Possibly. I wouldn't say bliss. I'd say something that you think is, worth doing. And I'm
On
not
what metric, though? What's the value?
in terms of something that you enjoy, something that will be employable, something that you can, develop further. And so what really was confusing for me in that time was I wanted to learn hand painted, but I was also being impatient. But the reason why I wanted to learn hand painted regardless was I felt that painting things manually would be a really great way for me to know how it should look so that when I go and do PBR, I know how it should look. I know how it should be made, if that
Mm.
makes sense. It's the learning of, like what you said, it's like learning why and learning how.
So, does that mean that when it wasn't working was when you were trying to use the skill to enable a skill you weren't directly working on, but when it started working was when you accepted the value of the thing itself and started working directly on that?
Yeah, yeah. The value definitely came in when I accepted it and I allowed myself to work on the skill of hand
Mm.
painted. And ever since then, I have been climbing back up Mount Stupid. Well, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
Mount Stupid, but
You don't really know
sometimes.
until you reach the top, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So to use another game analogy,
yeah.
it's sort of like you've got two really rare items, but you can't use one of them anymore because you reclassed, so now you need to trade it in for less gold than it's worth.
I would see it more as talent trees in a video game where I've specced all the way down this one talent tree, and then I've decided maybe I want to spec in that tree that I've always wanted to play. Like I specced in this tree because it's what all of the meta pro gamers were talking about, and they said this is the tree to play, and this is how you spec it. And I thought, yeah, okay, cool, I'll do that. Even though I kind of want to go down that tree because that tree looks much more enjoyable and funner. And so I got all the way down the ArcViz tree, and then I thought, okay, I want to go into the stylized hand painted tree. And as I'm specking down, I look down the tree of stylized art and go, man, I could be specking into that talent point right now if I hadn't have spent all this time going into ArcViz.
Well, that sort of ties back around to something we talked about on the pod a little bit more recently, where it's not really helpful to have that mindset, because when you think about it, if you were supposed to be on the other tree, the sooner you realize that and move to the one you should be on, that's actually the best decision. The longer you keep going down the wrong tree is actually the waste of time, but it's hard to see that because you're looking ahead and seeing how far ahead you were in ArcViz.
Yeah, and like I don't regret learning ArcViz because it's a good skill set to have in terms of just uh CG workflow, in terms of sort of learning a bit more of an artistic eye, and also something that I can now rely on as a freelancer. I've got some
Which is
ArcViz
important.
projects that are in the pipeline at the moment for freelancing, and I think
And
that's
also,
good.
yeah, and also the fact that if you go down a path that brings more activity, that might actually be worthwhile in the short term, because if you can get work doing ArcViz and you can't get work doing stylized hand painted, you're actually not moving forward as quickly by just focusing on stylized hand painted, because you're just sort of swimming in circles until an opportunity
Yeah,
arises.
it does make me a bit more of a flexible generalist if ArcViz is down. And say I'm freelancing in stylized art and I'm freelancing in ArcViz, then if one's down and the other is still afloat, then I can balance between the two. If they're both down, then at least it's better than one being in one and that is just down.
Yeah, it's micro multiple streams of income.
Yeah, very very micro. Yeah. Um,
It's just interesting because I think using the game analogy, it's going down the different tree. I think retargeting a skill set is changing game.
mm.
And I wanted to know, do you have any examples of that where maybe you've been in a completely different area and some of those skills have cross applied?
A completely different
No,
area, and then
no is an acceptable answer.
hang on. Yeah, I suppose. Would you say architecture is a completely different area?
I suppose, depending on if you're talking about like architecture with no visualization, attached to it,
Yeah,
because you sort of
I'd
did that
say
lateral shift.
yeah. So for the kids at home listening of how I've gotten to where I am is that I wanted to be a CG artist, and then I thought, maybe like I want to do a hireable career, so I went and studied architecture, and then I was like, maybe I want to do CG actually, so I'm going to go into ArcViz, which is between both, and then I'm going, maybe I want to be a game stylized artist, but I digress a bit there. So when I say that there are things from architecture that are completely unrelated to CG, it is almost like the rules of nature, which are principles of design, where I've learnt things. I'd say it's the principles. Learning, things that I learnt in first year, where I learn, um, you know, what forms and shapes and volumes, work well together and how to create interesting spaces. That then translates into, stylized environment art.
Designs with
Design.
negative
Yeah, it's,
space and texture.
design is design. It's all, you can have design, but then the specific skill around it can revolve, and it is all transferable knowledge. And that's something I've noticed, is that the skills that I've learnt in architecture school have been able to transfer into ArcViz in terms of, um, if there's something a drawing is lacking, I can add a little bit more detail than what is actually in that drawing, because I have the technical skill that I've learned at uni and that I've learned at work of, oh, well, they've designed this, they just haven't drawn that, so I've just got to add that little thing that's in there. And oh, suddenly it's a very minor detail and you won't specifically notice it, but the whole image just looks more realistic because there's little micro details in there that has elevated the render. And
That's an interesting place to sort of tie it tie it together with the original topic, because the reason I wanted to talk about these two together is the idea that moving from one skill set to another is very similar as going from zero to noob, because I think at the end of the day, my answer to that is immersion. Because the more you immerse yourself in things, the more you put yourself in places where you understand the context, the more you realize connections between things. And so where you're getting these basic design principles by being immersed in one and then being immersed in the other, you sort of see those through lines, and it gives you something to grip onto. And that's how you find your start line. That's how you find your 0 point to then use that handhold to go forward into more comprehension.
Yeah.
And the more times you do that, the easier it becomes. And so you can go from zero to noob faster.
Yeah, it's learning how to learn.
Yeah, very much so.
And I think that's, over the last 10 years, is something that I haven't perfected, but I've definitely gotten a lot better at.
It's certainly the focus in schools these days, because with Google at your fingertips, actual retained knowledge isn't as valuable. Until the solar flare comes and knocks out all telecommunications.
Yeah.
Actual retained knowledge isn't that important. It's sort of destroyed the oral tradition. Ask anybody with a phone, they'll check their phone and give you the answer. They won't try and rely on their knowledge of the thing, because that's actually become sort of taboo, because it's like, well, maybe you're wrong.
Yeah, and there are issues in that, but we won't dive deep into that. But
it's not the topic for today. But the point being that if you know how to learn and you know how to learn quickly, it even opens up job opportunities, because if it's a knowledge work role, you can be like, hey, I can do this job. As if you've got the gift of the gab, you can convince someone you can do it. You can go home, do a bunch of research, and then you actually can do it, because you have that information available to you. You just don't have the experience doing it, so you can't do it well.
Yeah, and I think that, I'm not too sure about you, Kris, but I think I started to learn how to learn fairly young. Just, when I was at school, just always Googling things, always Googling, how to blah or how to, I learned
Well,
how
I've always
to,
had this rule, especially when reading. The rule is never encounter something you don't know about twice. So if you encounter a concept, learn about that concept, so that next time you don't just learn to glaze over it, you actually understand why it was put there. I think that's learning how to learn.
Yeah, slight pushback on that is that sometimes you just need to stay on task and not go down rabbit holes, because it can be great to learn things, but if you encounter something and you go, oh, wow, that's mighty interesting, and ADD kicks in.
I agree with that to some extent, because there is a certain point of diminishing returns.
Yeah, it's not a solid clad rule principle, but it's learning to know when.
To answer your first question there, though, it's like, yes, I did learn how to learn from a very young age, because I never felt that the people who were teaching me in the way that I learn. And so I had to teach myself how to learn and how to sort of take what other people were giving me and apply it in a way that I could, actually address it.
Yeah, I think this is something that you and I could probably talk about with a bit of, relate to each other a little bit for a future podcast about, the schooling system, because the school for me really was not fun. Like, I taught myself pretty much the vast majority of things I learnt on my own. I mostly taught myself to read, mostly taught myself math, and that's just because the schooling was just like they weren't teaching me in the way that I learnt, and so I was like, okay, cool, I've got to figure this out.
I think that could be sort of rolled into whether or not to go to school for CG.
Yeah, CG
I think
schools.
That's a topic we'd like to hit at some point, and I think we could probably give a bit of background on that, because both you and I think, have fairly strong opinions. I think we hit that a little bit in the types of work podcast.
There's somewhere where we did talk about that. I can't remember where it
was.
But
I think there's more there that we can sort of dig our teeth into a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I can't remember which one it was. Oh, well.
I think it was the types of work. I don't remember which number that was. I think that might have been 6.
Yeah.
But anyway. Yeah, so to sort of just cap that off, I found a very similar experience with rehabilitating skill sets, but for me it was more about learning something completely different and then finding ways to apply it to the areas that I moved into, because I'd say that learning how to learn or knowing how to teach is a skill that I gained in another field that's been really helpful to me in CG, because learning how to teach also applies to yourself. And if you learn how to teach yourself, you retain, something like 90% of what you teach. And I think that's why it's important to put yourself in a position where you are both a student and a teacher at the same time.
Yeah.
Because you need to be relatable, but you also need to stay teachable.
Yeah, and I think to kind of continue on with what you were saying is that teaching somebody something is a great way to test what you know.
Yeah, because if they ask a question and your answer is shrug emoji.
Yeah, and it's actually a part of why we're doing this CG podcast, this GitGud.CG podcast. Please subscribe. Is that first of all, it's us just kind of rambling things out, but we are putting things out in a way that hopefully other people can find useful, but also in the process of doing that, we are actually testing the things that we are doing and the things that we know.
And running it past the out loud stupid test, because there's a certain amount of times, and it's not a magic number, but there's a certain amount of times everybody needs to hear something in a certain amount of ways before it clicks for them. And so that's why this sort of content is valuable to some people over other people, because some people it's the way that they need to hear it, and for other people it's not. But it could be like the information contextualizes, and then Mr. Andrew Price comes through and teaches them how to do a donut tutorial and everything clicks into place. You have to hear it 4 or 5 times before it makes sense. And it has to be from different sources.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if for instance, somebody doesn't have a shared background with you, if somebody doesn't have the context of the examples you use, there is no reason to relate to them. You don't have that understanding, and sometimes you don't even have that want to understand, because to bring teaching, to bring your self-education forward, you need to have trust in the source so that when it gets uncomfortable, you trust it enough to apply it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you think back to, say, primary school or elementary school, as the people in America would say, think back to those teachers where you are just entirely different people. The only thing you have in common is the space you occupy. I remember some teachers where they just they had no way of relating to the students in anything whatsoever. They just thought, cool, here's the things that you have to learn because XYZ had said so. And it was hard to retain. But if you have a teacher come along, whether it's in school or it's a CG school or it's a YouTube tutor or it's you yourself teaching, and the teacher is much more relatable because they are open to the fact that they are still learning, and they're learning by teaching you, or you're learning by teaching them, then it's beneficial for everybody and people come up a lot faster.
And it's testament to the difficulty of putting an educational system in place, because I can only speak from an Australian point of view, but a lot of the time what ends up happening is that the most undervalued times to be teaching people are the times that it's most critical that they learn. And so societally, you undervalue, for instance, primary school teachers by paying them, almost less than a living wage, which ironically is more than a lot of other people are getting who aren't in full-time work, but we won't get into that. But you undervalue your educators, and then they leave. And so you make a better incentive, so you get more people. But teaching is hard. So you either have to lower your bar for what is acceptable education, or you accept that you're not going to get as many people. And that's the constant fight in any educational system, whether it's private or public. It's what quality of teaching are you giving? Because you will never have enough teachers who bring enough to it in enough ways that you need to teach everybody.
Yeah,
and if you stop being selective, that's when you get into trouble.
Yeah, I just want to hit pause on the tangent for a sec. Have we... Do you reckon we have sort of hit those sort of issues or topics that we're talking about of rehabilitating a skill set? And what was the other one? Reallocating.
Reallocating. Yeah, retargeting.
Yeah, retargeting a skill set. So do you reckon we have hit those two latter ones?
Well, I think in your case, we eventually got to the fact that the skill that you took over was more of like a stream. It was more of like a a learning process that existed outside of the actual skills you were working on, and like you define it as design sensibility, but it's really that understanding of how the world sort of works, and that only comes with experience and time. So I guess rehabilitating a skill set is more about stripping away the specifics and finding that core through line that you can then take with you and apply to whatever it is you do.
Yeah. I think in a very roundabout way, we eventually got there, but it was...
It's been a very tangenty, chatty morning.
Yeah, I think we get very much more tangenty and chatty in the early mornings.
In the morning recording sessions,
Yeah, last time was it was a long one as well. I think this is the longest one we've done.
This is the longest one yet. It's going to be fun to edit.
Yeah. Pour some out for the homies of the editing.
What do you mean homies? It's just me, man.
Pour some out for the homie editing. Oh, I don't know, just like...
Thanks.
I don't know, there's editors all over the internet that have to... All of a sudden, PewDiePie has this, 20-minute video, and he wants to drop it on top of you.
And then most of the time gets taken up by editing the intro and the outro, because we normally ramble off into the sunset, and I have to pick a point where it actually ends, and then I have to pull something out of it for the stinger.
Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah. The stinger to, stitch me up in the intros and the outros.
Leave a comment below. Tell me, do you like me stitching Jayden up in the intros and the outros? Say yes, because it's funny.
Hey, I mean, I enjoy it. So
it's just a habit now.
Kris, where can they find you on your socials?
At animatorkris anywhere on the internet, and please sign up for the Y-Axis newsletter, link in the description. The more people who sign up in this early time period where it's still sort of a bit wobbly, the more likely I am to actually do it.
Yes, and you can find me at Twitter on JSTO_art, or on Instagram at Jayden.Ray, which is spelled RAI. Links in the description. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
See ya. Have you tried just talking to other animators that you see on Twitter or YouTube and just say, hey guys, what do you do?
Yeah, I have actually. The shy animator stereotype is real. I get zero response ever. I sometimes get a like.
Hey, I had this question. Can you please help me solve it?
I love this question.
Cool. Thanks, person.
The shy animator energy is super. I'm in this Discord for, specifically animators, and it's just dead. It's just a list of people entering the server and then sitting there waiting for somebody else to blink.
Why are animators so shy?
I don't know, but I can relate, so I don't know.
Oh, that's weird, but also kind of funny.
Yeah, it's just this weird thing I've noticed, and I reach out to people on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I don't know, man. I have not yet gotten a response. I don't know. Maybe I'm just coming at them too aggressively. I need to approach slowly. You know, the old Crocodile Dundee. You know.
Yeah. First, you've got to like everything they. No. Every fourth post that they post on social media, you've got to like.
Oh no! Wouldn't that be too aggressive to get all?
Yeah. Maybe every 10th post, and then work your way up to every single post, and then you message them.
The best I've gotten is a like from the lead technical animator from Lucasfilm, because I used one of his rigs.
Really?
Yeah. But still, you know, like